Consciousness is one of three levels of awareness, or three minds, as I like to call them. We have a mind that unconsciously knows the answers, and a mind that consciously does not know, thus asks questions, and a third mind, consciousness, which investigates, which relates the questions and the answers and makes sure they match up so we have the same information in these two different forms, and then chooses which to apply. The intuitive mind that knows the answers, or the rational, logical mind that would have us go carefully step by step. And surprisingly, this comes up in mathematics as three quantum symmetries, the symmetries of context, what it means to have a context, and where the self is our context. And so those symmetries are time reversal, charge conjugation, and parity, also known as mirror symmetry, which is what I say consciousness is. I am Andrius Kulikauskas. This is Math for Wisdom. I'm sharing a paper that I wrote, and I've given preliminary remarks in an earlier video if you want to see that. Now I'm starting with the abstract and the very first section. General intelligence functions in all relevant contexts. Similarly, absolute truth is true in all contexts. This suggests investigating general intelligence as inhabiting a metaphysics for absolute truth. We sketch a solipsistic metaphysics of human experience. Solipsistic means a person who's just living all by themselves as if there was nothing outside and just their relationship with themselves. And so that's the position Descartes took when he said, "Oh, I think, therefore I am." You know, like I may have to doubt everything out there, but I can't doubt I'm doubting. I know I'm doubting. So that kind of thinking. So it turns out that fermions, when they're modeled in condensed matter physics, in certain situations, it's pretty much analogous. And so this is an allegory, right, that I'll be making that kind of metaphor or analogy. Three levels of awareness. E, answering, R, questioning, San, investigating, are hypothesized to act as operators, +1, +2, +3, modulo 8, on 8 mental contexts, which are divisions of everything into K perspectives. So I'm using Chinese symbols here, mostly to save space, because there's a 10-page limit. You know, you'll see I just squeezed everything I could. It's kind of like my my approach to life, I guess, is, it's probably not necessarily the right approach, but you fight to say everything you can, to compress in what you can. And so it almost, I think, basically worked. This was a challenge to do that. So this is kind of cute, I think. I need to, and it kind of makes it look mathematical. I'm coming up with symbols so that I don't have to keep saying, the first mind, second mind, third mind, which would just sound tiresome. And so these ER san are the Chinese ways of writing numbers, and it's kind of convenient that they just write, 1 stroke, 2 strokes, 3 strokes. I kind of add this flagpole to them because otherwise, especially like the first one, would be hard to distinguish from just a dash. So let me continue. We compare this with twofold complex and eightfold real Bott periodicity in the representation of Clifford algebras, classification of superdivision algebras, embedding of Lie algebras, octonions, and tenfold way of topological insulators and superconductors. So if you've been watching my videos, I've been learning about these different places where Bott periodicity manifests. And basically, Bott periodicity is the belly button of mathematics. It's the symmetry of math itself, right? It all comes together in Bott periodicity, I think. There's all these ways of approaching it, and there's many more, and there's probably not a branch of mathematics that basically isn't tapping into that, as we will see. in the future, maybe not today, but we identify a self with the Hamiltonian of a non-interacting free fermion. Quantum symmetries T, C, and S define the Hamiltonian. We associate the division of everything into K perspectives with the Clifford algebra, CL 0, K, and the Kth perspective with the linear complex structure J sub K. We do not find evidence for operations +1, +2, +3, mod 8. Instead, we find evidence for selfhood as a universal form, where the three levels of awareness perceive the self in terms of its accessibility, inaccessibility, and definability. And this is fun to include. This is the whiteboard that I was using to put all this math together. And so this is, I would just meditate on this, look at this, struggle with this. And this is the template that kind of allowed me to sort out how is this going to relate, how to interpret this. Things like, what does it mean for Hamiltonian to be conjugated? What is that metaphysically? Inhabiting oneself. The quest for metaphysical algebra precedes AGI research. Spencer Brown, starting with a void and then repeatedly applying a single operation, distinction, derived all of Boolean algebra. And that's an interesting thing. I think that's even from the hippie days or so. Spencer Brown was electrical engineer and a philosophically thinking person. And if you know, you can derive all the logical operations from a single operation, which would be, let's say, the NAND gate. Or there's an opposite one, but basically, so like NAND, I think it means not and. And so if you just do different combinations of that, you'll get or, and you'll get and you'll get not, and you'll get everything you want. So he said, hey, well, what if we imagine that as just drawing a distinction, like in a void? You have a void, like a blank piece of paper, and then you draw a boundary, let's say, saying that, okay, we've distinguished something, and then you distinguish within the distinguishment, like, or you could distinguish parallel to the distinguishment. So using serial and parallel operations, you start to get different meanings. I think, yeah, I think that like if you do it twice serially, I think it negates itself. Maybe that's the way it works. So that inspired people like Lou Kauffman and Varela and others, and it inspired Ben Goertzel. Now, Ben Goertzel is the founder of this conference. So I stumbled across his own works. Okay, so and now I don't mention anybody in my paper practically because I'm saving space, and because it's this curious thing of trying to write anonymously. I don't really have a hang of it, so I'm trying to write a paper about my life work, but pretending it's not me, right? So all the personal intuition insights, etc. I'm trying to kind of step around. I guess I succeeded in that way. And I told myself, I'm pretending as if Ben Goertzel was my co-author, right? So I don't know. So maybe that'll give me a chance of having the paper accepted. Okay. But that's not how it worked out. In the 1990s, pioneers of consciousness studies discussed quaternions and octonions, coming up with SciNet, a complex systems model of the mind. They also contemplated Clifford algebras, which are classified by Bott periodicity, the subject of our paper. We will interpret this mechanism as the conditions for selfhood, classified in terms of the quantum symmetries of the Hamiltonian of a non-interacting free fermion. And so then what Goertzel did, and he had these buddies who were into quaternions and octonions and trying to make meaning of it. And I think the way they went about is, well, I think what Goertzel saw, I think was, look, you have this learning triad. Now, he had got it from Bateson, but I've told you already, like you take a stand, you follow through, you reflect. Well, so for Bateson, it was you have a perception, which would be like reflecting, and then you have a thought, which would be like taking a stand, and then you do an action, which would be like following through. That makes a 3-cycle. And so you have these generators, I, J, K of the quaternions. Well, that could model that because I times J is K, J times K is I, K times I is J. Now, if you do the opposite direction, you get negative. So he would wonder, what does that mean? And so on. And he goes, okay, well, that's kind of simple. And he was looking at it from a point of view of having all these agents. You see, so I'm looking at more like from a Descartes point of view of like how can I start knowing nothing and just come out with everything from a God's point of view, with absolute truth. Now he's coming at more from like an evolution point of view. How could you have evolution of these agents, right? Now, where they may link is that, well, I would say, well, these would be like attractors. Okay. And it turns out you can't find these attractors by studying emerging systems, I don't think. You can find these 8 attractors, these divisions of everything, by introspecting your mind. I think that's what I would claim. So I'm competing with the vast majority of academia, let's say, and trying to say, look, single-handedly, I will just show you that is, you got to go the way of someone like Kant. Oh well. So, but if you get this nice connection with the quaternions, then you can say, oh, well, how can you push it further? Well, the quaternions are the division algebra, and then you get the octonions. See, they also kind of made sense. Well, division, you should be able to undo learning. So I kind of question that. So he's only you learn and then you divide like you unlearn. How could you have like, well, octonions? And so then you have this, what this, we'll see this element L, and then you'll have Li, Lj, Lk. Well, those are going to be on the other side of a looking glass, a mirror. And I guess that's the theme of our time together is the mirror symmetry, right? So he calls it a inner eye, and Kauffman calls it the looking glass, right? And so then we'll return to this. But basically, I've been critiqued, not, I've been critiqued at the category theory, Zulip, for doing numerology, right? Now, think what you like, but my response would be, look, I documented the metaphysics of my experience as a human being. I did it by trying to look at not introspecting the processes of my thinking, the reasons why I thought or whatever. No, by doing the opposite, by freezing my mind, by eliminating like all my prejudices, by stepping into a void and then saying, oh, okay, what's the simplest issues? What are the things so things like free will versus fate, right? Like opposites coexist or it's all the same. There's no third possibility. I can't figure it out. Like, and how does the mind move? It can easily move from free will to fate, but not the other way around. Or like if I think of something being outside, like outside a cup, then there's also an inside. So opposites coexist. But if I fall inside the cup, then it's all inside. It's like falling inside the universe. There is no outside. Outside doesn't matter. It's all cup, right? So I'm just all inside. So the mind can go from outside to inside, but not the other way around. So this is the kind of thing you can study, and I think you can do that type of introspection. I'm trying to teach you and others to do this so that we could communicate that this is real, right? And get evidence. So I've collected personally this evidence. Now, how could anyone believe me? You need a community of practice. So that's another, so to talk about these basic things, it's a problem. But the point being that I came up with a whole metaphysics that I'll describe in an abbreviated way. And then I said, oh, does this appear in a way mathematically I can model it, right? So that's science. Right. And then now numerology would be the opposite. Say, oh, you come up with a math that you're fascinated by, and then you try to say, what could this possibly mean? Now, mathematically modeling something kind of works both ways. And you see, I'll be tackling this. I'll be saying, okay, now I've got my thing. I want it to fit. What would I have to do to make it fit? Right. So that's part of the learning process, right? And if you can't make it fit, then you say, and you'll say, oh, like I think it seemed to be wrong. Like this is just not logical what I'm talking about. Or you say, oh, this will make it more clear. So we'll have some of that as we go on. I will bring that up. But the point being that if somebody like Garrett Lisi's fascinated by E8, the exceptional Lie group, and then tries to build a theory of physics of the standard model using that, right? Well, that's closer to numerology. Or someone like John Baez is fascinated with octonions and wants to think that that's part of, quantum physics, possibly, it's worth looking into. I'm not against that, but that's more like numerology, right? Or people look at category theory and they kind of come up with interesting structures, and then they try to find application of that. That's working kind of backwards. You see, you're starting with the math and you're trying to figure out, well, how can I read into this to do some application? Um, okay, so I've made my point. This is just kind of rhetorical device saying, hey, like if you look at the early days of AGI, the consciousness studies, see, my work is starting in 82, the eight cycle and the three operations that came up in 1989. Consciousness studies only showed up in the 1990s. That's when the first journal was started. I actually knew the founding editor, Joseph Gogin of the Journal of Consciousness Studies. He was very friendly. He was very kind. But and he's very dearly missed. Um, but that was the world. And so now, 40 years later, I'm trying to enter into that discussion. It's not easy. So kind of saying, oh, hey, like, okay, uh, this discussion was going on. I would be part of this discussion. This discussion kind of stopped. But if it had continued, in 2009, that's when the tenfold way was figured out to say, hey, in condensed matter physics, you have these 10 different kinds of topological superconductors and insulators, and they can all be classified as combinations of these three quantum symmetries, which are organized by Bott periodicity. So that's what this paper is about. And I say here, our work in progress may be understood as an allegory. We first present the three minds and eight mental contexts that we aspire to model, and then, as faithful pilgrims, we show where we think we see them in the mathematical garden of Bott periodicity and the tenfold way. So that's another rhetorical advice to say, look, I mean, I want to have a model, but like what I'm telling is not yet a model. I mean, in the sense that I haven't bolted down all the math. And then I haven't explained, like, okay, what is this supposed to mean exactly? I'm in that process. It's a work in progress. And so why call it a model? I'll call it an allegory, so I'll deflate expectations. But it's not just an idea. It's not just an analogy or a metaphor. An allegory is this whole world, kind of like Harry Potter, like what does it mean? I guess there's a famous Pilgrim's Progress, like you have this whole story, where you have all these characters, but they all mean something, right? So why don't we just kind of relax and think of it that way as a kind of like fantasy story or science fiction story? Maybe I'll just say, like, what am I proposing? In our analysis, quantum symmetries are the symmetries of context. What sets of circumstances, what regularities allow a dynamical system to have its own Hamiltonian and thus a self-identity, a coherent time evolution? By analogy, in what ways do we assume or inhabit our very own selves? So the things that make Hamiltonians so important, which means that they can evolve in time and they can describe a dynamical system which could be in different modes, and there can be different pure modes and there can be mixed modes. And so basically it can be manifesting in different circumstances in different ways. It's like describing a system, a dynamical system, if it was like a coherent being, a self. And so that becomes, it's not like I said, oh, that looks like a self. I said, look, I've got this metaphysics. It led to Bott periodicity. It led to quantum symmetries, and that led to Hamiltonian. And then finally, I realized, all the quantum symmetries are revolving around the Hamiltonian. If you want to understand what makes sense of the quantum symmetries, it's all about the Hamiltonian. So what does the Hamiltonian mean? And then I go, oh, it means the self. And oh, this is a non-interacting fermion. It's the Hamiltonian for that. And I go, oh, well, that's a solipsistic self. Well, that's exactly what I've been doing, you see. So that's science. And that's a wonderful kind of like confirmation for me that I'm on the right track. We propose that a self is necessarily taken up in one of 10 different contexts, making explicit one or more distinctions, defined S or not, accessible T or not, inaccessible C or not, unconsciously plus one or consciously minus one with regard to a specific me or an unspecified being or a universal void. My word for God. We interpret the Hamiltonian as the self, quantum symmetries as levels of awareness, and twofold complex and eightfold real Bott periodicity as the sequences by which a being comprehensively cycles through its understandings of its own self. Thank you for watching this video. Please go to mathforwisdom.com or simply read the description to this video to learn how you can join our Math for Wisdom discussion group and our study groups. Thank you for liking this video, for subscribing to this YouTube channel, and for supporting Math for Wisdom through Patreon.
It's so easy. You go to patreon.com. When you're there, you type in Math for Wisdom, and after filling out a few boxes, you too can be a Math for Wisdom Patreon supporter. Give it a try. I did. It was very easy.